Today, I am joined by an absolute icon of Australian football, a man who really needs no introduction, but it'd be a pretty bad interview if I didn't introduce him. So, today, I'm joined by Simon Hill. Thank you so much for joining me, Simon.
Pleasure. Good to be with you. How are you?
I'm good, thanks. Even though that you're an icon of Australian football, you still don't escape my first routine question, which is just where your passion and love for football first started.
Well, ever since I can remember, to be honest. I mean, my dad is the reason. He's the culprit. He got me interested in football when I was 4 or 5 years of age. You know, kicking a ball around in the backyard, and this was in Northern England, obviously. And he was, and still is, at 87, a Manchester City supporter. My granddad was for all of his life. My great granddad played for them in 1890 something when they were known as Ardwick FC. So, you know, this is a natural progression for people in my family that football is introduced, and obviously the love of Manchester City. So I went to watch my first game when I was, I think, about 6 years old back in the 1970s, which shows you how old I am. And from that moment onwards, you know, I fell in love with City, first of all, obviously. And, you know, I've been mad, passionate City fan ever since, but more generally, the game of football. So that's where it all kicked off, really. But in Northern England, you didn't really have a choice anyway.
And I like to ask every commentator this, not to kind of put them under pressure, but to kind of get a general idea. So, in terms of on the pitch, what were you like as a player? What sort of position did you play? And how do you
Terrible.
rate your skills?
No, I was a pretty ordinary player. I played, you know, junior club football for many years when I was a kid. I was a left winger or on occasion centre forward. So I had a bit of pace when I was young. I've gotten on now. But yeah, I was a sort of a provider of goals, occasional taker of goals. I was probably a 15 goal a season at that level. I think the nearest I got to playing at any decent levels, I had a trial for the town team, and there was, and I've written about this in my book. There was a game when I was playing for my club side when I was 12 years old, which is a club called Utrington Rovers. And we knew that a Manchester City scout was coming to watch us that day. A very famous guy called Eric Malander, who used to sign all the, you know, the promising City youngsters. So, of course, that day I ran around like a blue-ass fly trying to catch his eye. I think I hit the post. He never looked at me. He did sign our goalkeeper, a guy called Steve Crompton, who I'm still in touch with till today. And Steve went on to win the FA Youth Cup back in the mid-'80s with the likes of Steve Redmond and Paul Molden, David White, Paul Lake, Andy Hinchcliffe, all those guys. But he never played a first-team game for City, and he was our best player by a mile. Let me tell you, he was a fantastic goalkeeper. So I think he had, I think he played about 12 lower league games for Stockport and for Carlisle United, but that was the end of his professional career. But he got a lot further than I did, that's for sure.
So we all know you're a Manchester City fan, and I'm sure we don't need to tell you this, but Manchester City were, to be honest, quite rubbish for a number of years before the
They were.
takeover. And I know a bit about rubbish football teams. I'm a Newcastle United fan. So a personal question, what's your
Yeah.
advice for me, considering, Newcastle's had a similar takeover to Manchester City? What can I expect?
Well, look, enjoy the ride, because hopefully and I love Newcastle as a city, by the way. I've been there many times. I love the football club because they're very passionate. It's true what they say about, you know, the Geordie nation. It feels like it's a region that is slightly apart because it's so far north. And if there is going to be success for Newcastle, enjoy it. You know, I wouldn't trade the trophies that we've won. For 30 years, I watched City and didn't think we'd ever win anything. So now it's become almost routine. It's lovely in many ways, but there's also a part of me, and I've said this many times before, that misses the old City. You know, 9 times out of 10, I'll watch City in the Premier League now and think, unless it's United or Liverpool or big Champions League game, I'll think, yeah, we'll win today. Unless we're seriously off, we'll win today. And I miss the feeling of going to a game, say against Chesterfield or York or Gillingham, and I've been to see all those with City, thinking, I don't know if we're going to win today. I think we could struggle against Gillingham, and there's a beauty in that, really. And there was a gallows humour in watching City for so many years when we were crap, that I miss, because there was such great banter, which I think has probably dissipated. And some of that's my age, and some of that's the fact that I don't live in Manchester anymore, and the fact that football in general has changed so much, and all-seater stadiums and all that, the terraces have gone. So there's a nostalgia in me for those days. But yeah, I don't think I'd swap that Sergio Aguero moment or being at Wembley in 2011 when we beat United. That was very nice. And I was right behind the goal for that Yaya Toure winner. So it's a mixture of both, really. And I always say that, I'll be City till I die, always will be. They'll always be my club. But for me now, there's a little bit of a disconnect, and partly that's due to living in Australia, but it's also partly because it's not the same club that I grew up supporting, but I still wear the jerseys.
Now, speaking of success, to say you've had some success in your career is a bit of an understatement. But going all the way back to the start, when was that moment that you thought, this is what I want to do? I want to talk about football for a living.
Yeah, it's a good question. To be honest, it probably started that day when I knew I wasn't getting the nod from Eric Mullender playing for Utrington. I think I sort of knew, even at that age, that I wasn't good enough to be a professional footballer, which of course is what I wanted to be. So the thought was in my head, even from those early days, because I loved football so much, still do. I want to work in it. And if I can't play, what's the next best thing? To be honest, the broadcasting came later. I wanted to write. That was my passion. And I envisaged being on The Guardian, being a bit of a lefty, or, writing for the Daily Mirror in the UK, or, worst, local papers covering football. So the broadcasting thing didn't come until I actually started my career. And I'll tell you the story behind it. I must have applied when I went to university in Portsmouth, and I started writing match reports for the Portsmouth youth team, which was sort of my start in journalism, for the local paper called the Portsmouth News. And when I finished my degree, and I did a postgrad in newspaper journalism, and I applied for goodness knows how many jobs. But it was right in the middle of a UK recession in 1991. So there wasn't really a lot around. And after probably about 50 or 60 rejection letters, almost out of desperation, I saw a job advertised in the graduate press for a commercial production writer for a radio station, which was essentially writing adverts. And I thought, okay, well, that's not journalism, but at least it's writing. That's something. It's a start. So I applied for it and got a letter back a week later saying, look, we don't think you're suitable for this job, but there is a job going here as a sports reporter if you're interested. So of course I was. So I applied, I got that gig, and that's where it sort of changed. I started working in radio and broadcasting, presenting bulletins, and then sports shows, and then going out to doing little bits of commentary here and there. So it changed. My career direction changed almost immediately that I started my professional career, but it was rather more by accident than design. And then, of course, TV came a little bit later.
So one thing I like to do when I talk to players is I like to talk to them about their debut, their first ever match. But with, reporters, commentators, all that sort of thing, we don't really have that. I think the closest thing we sort of have is the first player we interviewed, the first article we wrote. So do you remember?
I can tell you my first commentary.
Do you remember the first player you interviewed, the first commentary match? How do you think you went? Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to remember the first player I interviewed. Goodness me. That would probably have been a Portsmouth youth player, but don't ask me to name who he was, because that was 30 years ago. But I certainly remember my first commentary, or at least I remember what game it was. And the reason I remember it is most young commentators start off with a lower league game or a non-league game. That wasn't the case for me. So my first full commentary was when I went to BBC Radio Lancashire, and my boss, who's a bloke called Guy Havord, who I'm still in touch with today, works for Sky Sports in the UK, said, right, new season. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to divvy it up. You're going to present on a Sunday, which is the sports show, the 4-hour sports show, which I've done before. I will go out to a game on Sunday, and on the Saturday, we'll do the reverse. I'll host the show, and you go and commentate the games. And I said, well, okay. I've never commentated a full game of football. I've done little snippets, and he said, well, let's find out if you can do it, shall we? So my first game was Chelsea against Blackburn Rovers at Stamford Bridge in the Premier League. So it wasn't a very gentle introduction. It was sort of right in at the deep end. And I do remember the score, that Blackburn won by 2-1, which shows you how long ago it was and how powerful Blackburn were at the time. That was one of our local clubs that we covered. They were just on the rise at that point. They'd signed Alan Shearer, David Batty, Tim Sherwood, Stuart Ripley, Tim Flowers. So they were a season out from winning the Premier League, with a certain Robbie Slater in tow, of course, as well. So yeah, that was my first game. I don't remember too much about the match itself. I do remember that Colin Hendry, who was injured and couldn't play, came and did summarising for me in the second half, and he was very good with that. So that's how it started. And I must have done okay, because I'm still doing it 30 odd years later.
Well, I think people in Australia really, idolize you. I think to say you're the voice of Australian football is a bit of an understatement. But when you first found out about Australia, when you first come over here, Australian football seems to have a bit of a murky reputation across Europe, across England. So what were your first thoughts about Australian football?
Well, look, first of all, I'm not sure that's true. I just don't think Australia is on the radar of most European nations. And that might have changed a little bit in the interim, because obviously now we're in a much more global era where you can watch multiple leagues, via satellite TV and cable, etc. But certainly when I came over here, which was 2003, I knew nothing about football in Australia. I did some research. I read Johnny Warren's book, Sheila's Wogs and Poofters. I made it my business to, try and find out a little bit about the clubs and the league and the football culture here. I read a book called Shootout by Ross Solly, which is all about the politics, which is very interesting. So I had a little bit of an idea, but not much. And it was only really when I came over here and started working for SBS, who of course were my first employers, that I started to immerse myself in that culture. And for me, that was a natural thing to do, because being a football fan, the first thing I ever do when I go to a new place is go, right, what's the local football team? And are they playing at home this weekend? Because I can go and watch them. So I went all over Sydney watching. Northern Spirit was probably my local team at the time. But I went to watch Marconi Stallions, Parramatta Power, Sydney United, all those teams in Sydney of the era that I could get to, I went and watched, because I was fascinated by it. And the deeper I got into the local game, the more I loved it, not because it was wildly successful or because it wasn't dysfunctional, because it bloody well was, but because it had a fascinating history and still does. So I was, very quickly interested in why the game operated as it did here, and obviously the fact that the NSL was made up of teams that had ethnic origin, but that was only part of the question. Why was that the case? How did that come to be? So that led me to going down all sorts of rabbit holes about the history of migration into Australia, and before that, and again, this is a part of the game that I think people are just not aware of in this country, that we had a myriad of clubs before that, and many of them still exist. So why didn't they make the great leap forward to the National League? So I think it's fascinating, and all those stories I would love to see told on a much more broader basis. by the game's authorities and the game in general. But aside of a few very trusty historians, by and large, Australia doesn't seem very interested in it. And that baffles me. Because of all the football codes, we have the most interesting story to tell, because it's one that it doesn't go in a straight line. You know, all the others seem to a large degree, but ours is so broken, fragmented, with so many different eras, failures, successes, sabotage in many ways, internal and external. It's the most riveting tale. There's a movie in it somewhere, but nobody wants to make it. They don't care. And I find that bizarre. But maybe that's just me because I'm a football nerd. I don't know.
So coming from England, where pretty much everyone, as you said, lives and breathes football, you don't really have a choice whether or not to follow it, to
Yeah.
Australia, where we have cricket, rugby league, AFL, and football's really down the bottom of the pecking order. Did you find it difficult to adjust to that sort of climate at all?
Yeah, I did, and not that I hadn't anticipated it to a certain degree. I knew that there was an apathy about football and that it wasn't the number one code. I wasn't that stupid. What I wasn't probably prepared for was the antipathy towards it. And I'll give you a little example. So when I first arrived, obviously I had to ship a lot of my stuff over from the UK on the boat. And it took a few months to arrive. And when it finally got here, being a football person, being a football journalist, of course, I've got a lot of football books. So the two delivery guys came in and started helping me a bit with the unpacking and just, put in various boxes. And they noticed that I had a lot of football books. And this one guy said to me, "Oh, geez, mate, you got a lot of soccer books." And I went, "Oh, yeah, that's my job." He goes, "Yeah, game for puffs, mate." And I said, "Yeah, okay, you just do your job. If I want your opinion, I'll ask for it." And that irritated me. And it irritates me to today because I'm not sure he would have said the same thing had it been a whole crate load of basketball books or hockey or whatever it is. It would have passed by without comment. But because it was soccer, the great Satan, it was deemed worthy of comment. And immediately that's got my back up. And it's sort of sad because, I used to watch a lot of sports when I was back in the UK, including on the odd occasion a little bit of rugby league. Obviously, I don't watch Aussie rules because that's, it doesn't happen in the UK. But I watched a little bit of rugby league, and I was open to that when I came over here. I went to watch State of Origin. I went to watch a couple of NRL games. But the hostility that our sport received from, I'm not saying the people in charge of those sports, but certainly some of the writers and the journalists, who of course were protecting their own patch, very quickly made my mind up that, it was almost like I had to make a choice. And for me, it was no choice because obviously football was always my number one. So for me, it became, okay, well, if you're going to disrespect my sport, then I ain't watching yours. And I haven't done, from that day forward, really. Now, partly that's because I'm obviously very busy with football anyway, but I think it's a bit of a it's a bit of a tragedy, really, for the coverage of all sports in this country, that these code wars continue. And I understand the reasons for them. There's a lot of money at stake, a lot of jobs at stake. It doesn't need to be that way, really, but that's the way it is. And if it is a war, well, I'm in the trenches for football.
You've commentated on a lot of big events, African Cups, World Cups, Asian Cups, but I think for us Australians, particularly people around my age, one of the biggest events in football, if not the biggest that we can remember,
I know what's
November 16, 2005. And I think you've said in the past a couple of times that it was one of the most difficult matches you've commentated on.
Yeah.
So it's just, what was so difficult about it? Was it because Craig Foster was getting so excited? Was it the occasion, or was it just a mixture of everything?
Yeah, it was mainly Fozzie, to be fair. It wasn't just that. I think in part, and again, I've said this many times before, I'd been in Montevideo 4 days prior for the first leg. and I'd only been back in the country for probably 48 hours. So I was jet lagged because we've been over in South America for I think 9 or 10 days. We went to Argentina prior to Uruguay to cover all the the pre-game build-up. So I was jet lagged. I was tired. I was obviously very aware of how big this moment was potentially on the night. I wanted to get it right, particularly as I was pretty new to the country as well in those days. Obviously, I'm not saying I have a big profile, but my profile is bigger now than it was then. So I wanted to prove myself a bit and, nail it, as we say in the profession. And, Fozzie's emotion on the night, as much as I understood it, certainly didn't help my cause. And, Fozzie will admit that today, that he was horribly emotional over it. Now, I remember, and I've said this many times as well, going home that night, everybody says to me, "Where did you go?" "Oh, that, what a night that was. You must have gone out and had about 10 beers that night." I went home, I had one beer and went to bed. Partly because I was knackered, because calling 120 minutes and penalty shootout for a game of that magnitude is emotionally and mentally exhausting, let me tell you. But also because I thought we would get hammered for that call the day after, because I don't think it was very good. I still don't think it was very good. Now, the reason why we didn't, and this was a good lesson for me and probably many commentators, it's not about us. It's about what happens on the pitch. And because Australia won, nobody cared. It's become part of folklore that it was so chaotic, because Fozzie in many ways echoed what people at home were thinking and feeling. And, retrospectively, I understand that. But if you ask me professionally, was that a good night? No, not for me. Because broadcasters, certainly from, where I'm from, are supposed to be impartial. And we weren't that night. But maybe that's the way Australia wanted it, and remember it fondly because of that. So I'm glad about it in many ways. And, I'm happy, obviously, that I played whatever small part I did in such an iconic moment. But every time I hear the call, I've heard it so many bloody times over the years, I just cringe. I want to switch it off. I much prefer the World Cup in Germany. That was better.
That if John Aloisi can score this goal, Australia will be there.
Are you sure?
I'm trying to do my maths.
4-2. 4-2. He wins it for us. John.
Here's Aloisi for a place in the World Cup.
For us.
He scored! Australia have done it!
John! Come on!
John Aloisi, the Confederations Cup hero, has done it in the biggest game of all.
Come on, Australia! Johnny Warren!
At last, at long last, 31 years, 4 months and 24 days have passed since Australia ended its campaign at the 74 World Cup. And now, finally, belatedly, wonderfully and joyfully, Australia is back on the biggest stage. What a night! What drama, what tension!
Moving away from commentary for a minute, you've also done a lot of jobs, but one of the most interesting, I think, in my opinion, was when you were the ground announcer at Newcastle Jets. Personally, it caught me a little bit off guard. I was at a Jets game. I heard, over the PA, and I thought, this voice sounds familiar. So what was it like being a ground announcer? What were some things that, you might not realize from a fan's point of view about being a ground announcer, and how did you enjoy it?
It's a good question, actually. To be honest, I probably didn't think that deeply about it at the time. I was more grateful to the Newcastle Jets, remain so to this day, for giving me some work. And I mean, that the ground announcing was obviously something that people sort of heard and went, "Oh, okay, that's what he's doing." But I also hosted chairman's functions for them, inside the stadium on other particular games. So Newcastle were and still are very good to me. That was a year in my life, obviously, when I left Fox, that was very, very challenging for me, not just mentally, but financially. I needed to work. Sports commentary, football commentary, as wonderful as it is, we don't get paid as Yaya Toure gets paid. So you still need to earn to pay your bills and your mortgage. So, when my work at Fox stopped, I fell off a financial cliff. So I was grateful for anybody who threw some work my way, and Newcastle were good enough to do that on several occasions. So I did it. Was it mentally challenging? Not very, to be brutally honest. It's, I've been a broadcaster for 30 years. So, talking to a crowd is not an issue. It's a little bit different. Sometimes there were, some sponsors whose name I didn't know how to pronounce, or there were times when I perhaps jumped in a bit too quick when I needed to wait a couple of seconds. But it was an interesting experience. I wouldn't say it's something I particularly want to do full time, but in the interim, I was very grateful for that work because it paid me some money and I needed it. And the fact that it allowed me to stay involved in football, and probably made one or two ears prick up when they heard me over the stadium tannoy, which was an added bonus. I'm like, oh, that sounds familiar. So no, it was, the year that I had out from commentary was, as I say, very difficult, but it also allowed me to do a lot of very different things that I hadn't done before. And that was certainly one of them.
First goal for the Newcastle Jets, scored by number 41, Valentino Yule.
And you're obviously back in commentary now with Channel 10, the new look A-League, men's and women's. So firstly, how are you just enjoying being back on the TV commentating Oz football again?
Yeah, well, I missed it. When you've done something for so many years, as I've done, obviously I commentated on the A-League for 15 years. And even prior to that, I was commentating on Premier League European football back in the UK. So last season was the first football season that I hadn't been regularly involved. I mean, I was still involved in the periphery because I was doing various other things, but, not having that focus on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday to go, right, I've got a game this weekend, so I've got to prepare for that. It was very difficult. And I missed it. It was like a part of me had been cut off, almost like losing a limb. You didn't have that focus every week. Now, don't get me wrong, in some ways it was quite nice. I had my Saturday nights free. I could go out and have a beer if I wanted to, or sit in and watch the TV. So there were bonuses to it, and it was mainly the latter, given that we were in lockdown due to COVID as well. But I did miss being involved on a weekly basis and having that edge to, doing commentary, which is what I do. I've done it for all my working career. So it's nice to be back. I'm enjoying doing the games. Obviously, we've only just started. Channel 10 are very enthusiastic. They've been absolutely fantastic with me, I have to say, which I really appreciate, after a difficult few years. So, yeah, it's good so far. And hopefully, there's a lot of upside to come, both with the deal and the A-Leagues, plural, these days. We've got a lot of work to do to get it, where it needs to go. But hopefully we've started the journey.
So when it was first announced that Channel 10 got football, I felt sorry for the Channel 10 social media guy, because they just got absolutely flooded with comments asking, where's Simon Hill? When are you going to announce Simon Hill? And I think I mentioned earlier just how much you are loved by the Australian football public. So for someone who's come from England into this, a bit of a minefield of a landscape at times, just what does this support from the Australian football public mean to you?
Look, I was very humbled by that. From the moment I left Fox and to the moment I was appointed by Channel 10, I received, with maybe one or two exceptions, but you're always going to get that, but 99.9% of people were so supportive of me. And to be honest, I'm not sure I expected it to that extent. I thought I might get a bit of sympathy here and there, I'd worked in it for a while, but I didn't anticipate it being that strong. And it's it made me, quite emotional for a long time. In fact, certainly for the first few months, which were very difficult after I left Fox, that support from the football community really sustained me. And I think I've said this before. I was very close to going home last November. I was struggling for work a bit, and the prospect of getting back into commentary at that particular point it seemed a little bit remote. And I was very close to going back to the UK, and I didn't because the COVID spike happened in England. But throughout all that was this thought that I had a bit of unfinished business, and that I'd received so much, support and love, I'd even say, from so many people, that maybe I should tough it out and just wait a little while. And then by January, February, of course, things had started to change just a little bit. And I thought, okay, I'll hang on a while and wait and see. So I was very grateful, as I say, very humbled by the support I received and continue to receive, which is very, very nice. I hope that, down the years I've given a little bit back. And I think, without, trying to sound too egotistical, one of the reasons people have probably latched onto me is that I do speak on behalf of a football fan, because I am one. I don't pretend to speak on behalf of the whole community, because there's lots of different views, but I think people, perhaps recognize that I have football in my heart, and that I desperately wanted to succeed in this country. I don't always get it right, same as everybody else, but I think that's maybe why it's become a bit of a thing. But it's very nice, and let's be brutally honest about this. It's also because I've been a part, in TV terms, of most of the big moments over the last 15, 20 years, for which I have to thank Fox and SBS, because they gave me that opportunity. So sometimes you become sort of part of people's lounge rooms by default. But it's a nice thing to have, and I'm very grateful for it.
And you've mentioned your book a couple of times, brilliantly named.
Wasn't trying to plug it. Sorry.
I've got a question about the book. I'll leave it to one because I don't want to ruin the book. Was there any stories that after you wrote the book, you just thought, man, I wish I put this in. This would have been a great story to tell?
Oh, there were quite a few. But obviously, the one thing I learned writing a book, and again, that was a very different experience, is that, and I knew all the stories because it's an autobiography. So the writing was the easy bit for me. Splurge it all out on the pages. The tricky bit is the editing process. And of course, when you're talking about stories that involve other people, some of which might be a bit risque or, a bit on the edge, if you like, you've got to consider legal ramifications as well. Maybe some people don't particularly want that story written, or they don't want people to know that they did that, 15 years ago, or that they said that to you when, they were in the heat of the moment. So you've got to be very careful, even though it sounds an easy process, just recounting stories from your past. It can impact upon a lot of different people. So the editing process took a long time. And by the end of it, I was fed up to the back teeth of it. I've never read it since, because I read it so many bloody times when I was editing it. But it's something that I'm glad I did. It didn't make an awful lot of money, which didn't matter. I didn't do it for that. I did it because, I wanted to do it for me, really. If other people read it and enjoyed it, then that's a nice bonus, I think.
And to say 2021 was a bit of an interesting year for you is a huge understatement, I would say. But 2021's nearly over. 2022 is just around the corner. So what are you hoping to achieve in 2022? What can we expect to see from Simon Hill?
That's a good question. Well, hopefully I'll still be commentating. Obviously that's my bread and butter, every week. So I'm just focusing on that for the time being. I have a radio show as well that goes out on SEN. So, I want to continue doing that. And I just want to continue trying to play my part if I can to, try and make this game a bit better. I don't have responsibility for that because I'm not in charge of anything, but I can, try and keep people a bit honest journalistically. I can cover the game good, bad, indifferent in the best way that I see fit and know possible how to do. So that's my job, and to try and grow the game, and or even get it back to where it was a few years ago, which seems a long way away now. So we've got a lot of work to do. So we'll be busy. But yeah, overall, it's, as I say, it's nice to be back involved in football. It's, as I've said many times, it's not just what I do, it's who I am.
Well, it's been good to have you back, and it's been good to have you on today, Simon. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks, Sharp.
Thank you for watching. This video is sponsored by Arrow Sport. Go to the link in the description, and the friendly team at Arrow Sport will help you create your own football dream jersey. Whether it's starting from scratch or using one of their many templates on their website, creating a jersey with Arrow Sports is easy, and prices start from just $50. Go to www.arrowsport.com.au and make your football kit dreams become a reality.